Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, or good morning, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to the second session in the PHSC RPSC Postal History Symposium Advanced Track. We're very glad you're here. We're really pleased to welcome Kevin O'Reilly, who's going to be speaking to us about Fool's Gold, Labrador's mining rushes. Kevin O'Reilly started collecting stamps of the world when he was introduced to the hobby by his mother. He first collected Canada, then focused on the centennial definitives. Some self-addressed covers sent to northern post offices in 1972 proved to be a turning point as he quickly began to specialize in the postal history of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, as well as the Eastern Arctic Patrol, Yukon, and Labrador. Sidelines included United States Army Air Force post offices, APOs, in Canada and Newfoundland, the International Grenfell Association, and W Force in Newfoundland and Labrador. Commercial mail to and from Labrador before Confederation is very scarce. The permanent population of Labrador in 1949 was only 6,000 people, with many more joining them during the summer season. Kevin has resided in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories in Canada since 1985, working for a variety of Aboriginal and public government agencies and non-governmental organizations. He's had an extensive involvement in the environmental assessment and regulation of resource development in the Northwest Territories. He served on the Yellowknife City Council from 1997 to 2006. He holds a bachelor's degree in environmental studies and a master's in urban and regional planning from the University of Waterloo. He's published on Northern Canada topics and in many philatelic journals, and his 1987 book, Northwest Territory Postal Cancellations, 1907 to 1986, won the PHSC of Canada's Frank W. Campbell Award and continues to serve as the standard reference for the field. So Kevin, welcome, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Greg. It's a balmy minus 15 outside here today. We've got about 6 inches of snow on the ground, so winter has arrived. But I'd like to thank the PHSC and the Royal for putting this on today. And both Bob and Greg personally, I sent them a draft of this and they gave me some helpful feedback as well. So I'm going to dive right into this. I'm not going to read the slides, and hopefully we can find a way to get them posted to the website. So I'm going to skim through a lot of this. I've got 40 slides and not nearly that amount of time to go through material. So let's get started. And let's see how there. So this is an outline of what I'd like to try to cover in my presentation today. There'll be some introductory remarks about Labrador and the Postal Service. I'll talk about the Stag Bay Gold Rush that took place in 1923, and then the Wabash-Gatseo Gold Rush that took place exactly 10 years later in 1933. And both of them involved some surreptitious salting of samples. And then I'll talk a little bit about some opportunities for further research and some conclusions. I just want to point out on the map here that the Labrador is of course, the big part of the mainland that's part of Newfoundland and Labrador. Stag Bay is about halfway up the coast, and Wabash-Gatseo is about the same latitude, but it's way in the interior and really made for two different kinds of transportation systems into these places. So I'm going to talk about these two gold rushes that took place before Confederation. I mentioned that no gold was ever found, that deceptions were involved in this. And I'm going to focus on the gold rush history as well as the postal services around them. And I'll show you some covers as well, of course. So the first Europeans started to come to the Labrador coast in the late 1400s. Spanish and Portuguese fishermen, some English fishermen as well. And then the French started to move out towards Labrador along the north shore of the St. Lawrence. And Labrador really became part of New France until 1763, and then it was actually part of Quebec or Lower Canada until 1809 when it was transferred to Newfoundland. And of course, Newfoundland was a separate colony at that time. The Moravians were also active along the Labrador coast as early as the 1770s. They established a series of missions there. There was fishing, whaling, and the fur trade were the main economic drivers in Labrador right through to Confederation and even afterwards. And as Greg mentioned, a very small resident population, less than 6,000 people, a lot more in the summer when fishermen would come over from different parts of the States, Europe, and Canada as well. So the main transportation systems for mail, of course, were steamers and smaller ships in the summer along the coast. And in the winter, dog teams were used. People would wear snowshoes and hike from one place, one community to the next, carrying mail. The first formal mail service began in the 1860s when the Newfoundland government contracted steamers, and it started to expand out from along the north shore of the St. Lawrence as well, from Quebec City, and right out into the Straits of Belle Isle, and made connections with the Newfoundland Postal Service starting in the 1880s. The offices in Labrador started off as way offices. They really were just places where people could pick up mail and deposit mail. There was no real formal system uh, other than somebody would be designated as kind of the receiver of mail. But in the first town post offices really only started in the late 1880s, and there are some date stamps that were proofed around that time as well. So post offices kind of gradually started to open up along the south coast, along the central coast, into the 1920s, 1930s. Not a lot of these offices actually had their own postal markings, but they are out there, and we're going to show you some examples. So I'll move now to the Stag Bay Gold Rush, and there was an investor from Montreal by the name of Henry Bellew who obtained some timber rights on the central Labrador coast in 1921. He sent out a couple of survey parties. He was involved with that work in the summers of 1921, 1922, and they staked a number of mining claims in this area around Stag Bay, and those were registered at the mining recorder's office in St. John's in October 1922, and it started a gold rush. There were false claims made about gold in the samples that Bellew had taken. Misleading advertisements were appearing in local newspapers and in Ontario as well, and I'm going to show you some examples of that. The mining experts were very suspicious of all of this, and although the Newfoundland government really didn't take any position, I think they were more interested in the revenues that they were making. So this is a map that I got from the National Archives in the UK, showing the mining claims that were staked in the Stag Bay area. And Stag Bay is there's kind of three bays shown on the black and white map, and the Stag Bay is the one in the middle. And there's these streams that kind of come out from the interior onto the coast, and there was black sand in them, and what really was fool's gold in there, and even pieces of mica, and it kind of looked like gold, but it really wasn't gold. But it started a bit of a staking rush here, and there wasn't really any formal maps back in those days. The map on the left-hand side is a modern day map, and you can see that it's a little different than what they thought the islands and shoreline looked like, but most of the activity was centralized on the northern stream called Big Brook. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. There was a police station set up there, and that's, I believe, where the post office at Stag Bay was located. So here's some of the misleading advertising that was appearing in the Ottawa journal of the day, trying to entice investors and speculators into putting their money into this endeavor. And some people did make money, and a lot of people lost money. But this is to just kind of show you the context of what was happening. So Bellew claimed that he had samples that assayed with high quantities of gold in them. In January of 1923, mining experts started to raise some doubts about this. The governor of Newfoundland even wrote the Newfoundland Premier in March of 23, recommending that there should be a public warning about the mining rush, but that was ignored. In May of 1923, the New York assayer that was apparently the one that provided these results denied that this Bellew had actually even submitted any samples whatsoever. The Canadian Geological Survey actually issued a warning to the public in Canada about this supposed gold rush. And Bellew was actually forced out of the company called Labrador Goldfields in May. But they continued to work during the summer of 1923 to collect more samples, and a bunch of people came from other parts of Canada and particularly from the Maritimes and Newfoundland to try to find if there was any gold there. There was never any legal action undertaken against the Bellew or some of the other people that he was connected with. Around this time, there was the Aerial Survey Company of Newfoundland operated some flights out of Botwood. There was an Australian aviator by the name of Sidney Cotton, and he had brought a few planes to Newfoundland, and he was flying them around hoping to make some money. And he staked some claims in Labrador as well with one of his colleagues, and they proposed a flight in April of 23 to get into the Stag Bay area early before many of the others might arrive by water to try to take some samples and get a jump on everybody else. So they were going to start from the company's main base in Botwood, then fly over to the west side of Newfoundland, and then hop over to Labrador from there. And as I said, they wanted to get an early jump on this, maybe get some, take some aerial photos, conduct some mapping, survey work, and get some samples so they could get back to St. John's and get them analyzed. 3 aircraft started out on the trip in early of May of 1923, but at the end, they only decided to take 1 aircraft. It was getting very late in the season, and they did fly over to Labrador on May the 10th, and they landed at Riglet, a Hudson Bay Company post a little bit to the south of Stag Bay. So they landed there in the morning. The plane took some damage when they landed on the ice. They had to make some repairs. Then the next day they took off, and they did take some air photos. And there's an example of one in the shown on this slide. They didn't land at Stag Bay because the ice conditions were so bad. They just flew over, took some air photos, and came back and landed at another Hudson Bay Company post called Cartwright, where they picked up some mail, and then they headed back to Newfoundland. So it was a very quick trip, very late in the season with poor ice conditions. But mail was carried on this flight. And here's an example of one of those covers. And this was actually a self-addressed cover from a philatelist in Harbor Grace near St. John's, and it was carried out on the outward flight and then carried back in. And you can tell that from the dates, May the 13th, Cartwright on the front of the cover, and then May the 16th on the back at Botwood when the flight returned. So a little bit more now about the Stag Bay Gold Rush itself. The Newfoundland government sent a party of government representatives up to Stag Bay area on the SS Watchful, a steamship. They anchored offshore. There was a headquarters for the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. They sent a detachment up. They were kind of modeled after the Mounties in northern Canada. They built a building and actually had a jail as well. I don't think anybody actually ended up in it. They were only there for a couple of months though, and then they left in August um, and back to St. John's. But there's a photo of the policemen on board the ship. There was a post office established, and it was given the name Stag Bay, although it wasn't really at Stag Bay. It was a little bit north. I think it was actually located on the land, but it's not clear. There's no government records of the day. The postmaster was a fellow by the name of Frederick Legros. He served in World War One. And here's a couple of more photos of the policemen at their building at Stag Bay. A little bit more about Legros as the postmaster. He did become a member of their House of Assembly in Newfoundland in an election in 1919. He only served one term. He was paid $648 and change for his services as postmaster at Stag Bay in the summer of 1923. Stag Bay was served by the coastal steamer traveling post office route from St. John's to Hopedale. And when I look through the newspapers, it looks like the ship may have stopped there between about 3 and 6 times, depending on whether they stopped on both the north and southbound trips of the ship. So a very short period of time just in the summer of 1923 for this post office and the gold rush itself. The Newfoundland Government Railway that conducted the steamship service, they were paid $316 and change for the conveyance of mail from Stag Bay. So clearly there was some mail carried. And the Department of Posts and Telegraphs contributed some money towards the cost of the government expedition up to Stag Bay and back. And as I say, it's not exactly clear whether the post office was on board the ship or on the mainland of Labrador, but I tend to think it was on the mainland in the police station. So there's only 2 covers actually recorded from this very short-lived gold rush. And here's one of them on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. It has one of these box cancels. And this one was, I think, clearly sent by one of the policemen that was at Stag Bay. It's rated properly, 3 cents. The stamp is actually tied by a black barred obliterator that I think was probably put on board the ship, the TPO service. But the kind of box cancel is not an uncommon type for Newfoundland and Labrador. And there's an example shown on another cover of that type on the lower right-hand side of this slide from 1927. Here's the second item from the Stag Bay Gold Rush, and this is courtesy of Brian Stalker in the United Kingdom. He kindly gave me a scan of this item after he found it, and this is from somebody on board the ship, the Watchful, at Stag Bay in July, and I think it was sent by a member of the crew. It doesn't have any the stamp is, or the indicia on the stationery card, postcard is not canceled in any way, but it's got this lovely cachet on the back, Her Majesty's Customs, or His Majesty's Customs. So, and I think it was probably just put directly into the TPO service, which kind of supports the hypothesis that the post office was actually on board, or sorry, on the shore and the police station. So that's it for the Stag Bay, very short-lived Stag Bay Gold Rush. And I'm going to move now to the Wabash Catseo Gold Rush, which was in the Labrador interior. And this happened exactly 10 years later. There was a Canadian Airways pilot by the name of David Simpson Bondurant, who heard stories of gold in the interior from a Canadian prospector by the name of Reuben Dagla. And he had stories about how Innu First Nations people from the interior had a cross made out of gold and traded it in to traders at Sept-Îles on the north shore of the St. Lawrence, and Daigle said that he had believed there was gold in the interior and convinced Bondurant that they should work together, and they got some special concessions from the Newfoundland government in the interior and there was 22 other concessions granted. This was a very unusual arrangement, but the Newfoundland government made some money from this, and they were happy, I think, to take the revenues. There was about 100 people involved in the gold rush in the summer of 1933, and they formed a number of groups and syndicates. And there's some of the names there on the slide. And there's a photo of Reuben Daigle in the lower right-hand side of the slide, and he's the apparent discoverer of the gold on this rush, and of course it proved to be fake as well. This is a map showing the concessions that were issued by the Newfoundland government, and the Labrador Quebec boundary was only settled in 1927. It had been a long simmering dispute and was resolved by the British Privy Council, largely in favor of the Newfoundland government in 1927. And the red dot that you see on this map shows where the Newfoundland government set up a tent camp, which was their headquarters at a place called Daigle Bay. And the green dot on this map shows where the modern day town of Wabush is in Western Labrador. So just to give you some orientation there. But you can see there was a number of concessions issued and a bunch of people out there staking and prospecting in the summer of 1933. So I mentioned that the Newfoundland government set a party up to this area as well in June, and there was a surveyor, a justice of the peace, a customs and postal official. So there was a post office here as well, a camp assistant and a cook, and they flew into the interior with a Canadian Airways pilot in a Fairchild aircraft. And there's a photo of them leaving from Moisey on the north shore of the St. Lawrence. A post office was set up at the government camp in a tent, and the government party, though, was withdrawn in the middle of September. Things were getting cold, and they knew at that point that there really was no gold whatsoever. So the post office was at the government camp, as I mentioned. The first inward mail arrived on July 20th of 1933, and there are covers for that first flight, and I'll show you some. The outbound mail left a couple of days later. The date stamp was made by Pritchard Andrews, an engraving company in Ottawa, and it's recorded in the Post Office Department proof books for the Canadian Post Office Department by Pritchard Andrews. So there's the proof strike. And the post office really was only open from July to September. There's the recorded use from July 20th to September the 8th, and the post office would have closed when the Newfoundland government party was withdrawn. The other interesting aspect about this gold rush from a philatelic perspective is that the Newfoundland government issued a special set of airmail stamps just for this gold rush. Of course, they were received much wider distribution, but they were quite high values for the day. 60 cents, 75 cents was a fair chunk of money in 1933. And they also had special rates for the airmail service into Labrador, and they were announced in the newspaper, and it was 30 cents per ounce for airmail in or out, 60 cents for a return item, and 10 cents extra for registration. So I think the Newfoundland government looked at this as an opportunity to make some money, both on the mining concession side, but also sales of stamps and providing this service. So here's a photo of one of the aircraft that was used by Canadian Airways. The Newfoundland government paid the Canadian Airways $1 a pound. Flights were made from the North Shore of the St. Lawrence, either from Moisey or Sept-Îles. and they were, I think said that they were paid $1 a pound for the mail that was carried. And there are records in the Canadian Airways archives in Winnipeg, Manitoba, so you can track all of the flights back and forth from the 2 aircraft that were used. And that's what I did, and prepared this table showing all of the flights that were made by the 2 aircraft on at least the dates where the post office was operating. I mentioned the first flight on July 20th. 40 pounds of mail was carried inward and 36 pounds was carried outward. Sometimes on the flight sheets for each of those flights, it indicates whether mail was carried or not, and the quantities, but clearly quite small quantities of mail were carried. And the cells that are highlighted in green, I've actually seen mail carried on those flights. So there's lots more flights that were made, and perhaps more covers will emerge at some point from those other flights as well. These are the caches that were used on the first flight. On the incoming flights, they are in red ink, and they're on the left-hand side of the screen. And you'll see there's a first flight to Wabash Katseo, and then the outgoing flights, the same 2 caches anyways. First flight from Wabash Katseo, and the blue ink was used on those. On the incoming flights, there was also this cache kind of showing the map of the concession areas. Here's an example of a Canadian cover that was carried on the first flight for a lowly 6 cents, which was the airmail rate for Canada, and signed by one of the pilots at the bottom left-hand side of the cover. But you'll see the Labrador Wabash Katseo date stamp on the reverse side. It was quite a large date stamp, and it was probably hard to get good strikes. And given that it was being used in a tent, probably on some makeshift table, clear strikes are really hard to find. Now here's an example of an incoming cover from St. John's, although the sender was somebody who was actually located in Cartwright, Labrador. That fellow actually worked for the Hudson Bay Company, but it originated in St. John's. And interestingly enough, it was carried back from St. John's, probably returned to this fellow in Labrador, and received the outgoing mail cachet rather than the incoming one. But it's an interesting example of a cover addressed to the guy who started Gold Rush, Captain Bondurant. Here's a couple of examples of incoming mail. One addressed to one of the guys in the government party. That's the one on the left-hand side of the screen. And the one on the right-hand side is addressed to the postmaster, but it was returned clearly to the collector, whose address appears on the backside. So it's properly rated at the 70 cents. And the caches on these ones are in red ink. And you can see the Wabash Katseo circle date stamp on the back as a receiver, and blue ink and kind of smudgy cancels, but you can find these covers out there. This is perhaps a little bit more interesting cover because it's an example of commercial mail, and it's from a mining engineer with a kayak syndicate. And there was actually a letter enclosed in this envelope, and clearly the recipient was a collector, but this guy was sending this to a friend, a colleague, and um, uh, interesting amount of stamps. They were probably running out of some of the higher value stamps, but it was a registered commercial outgoing piece of mail, which is quite scarce. Here's another incoming or an incoming cover to the Minister of Agriculture and Mines. This fellow Walsh was actually part of a government party that went in and conducted an inspection. And I think this cover may have been held for his arrival, or could have been returned under cover. Here's a self-addressed and signed cover by pilot Babe Woollett, with a sticker for Canadian Airways on the lower left-hand side of the cover, signed by him, and on company stationery. So probably rated at 30 cents. There was so many registered outgoing pieces of mail that they had to delay the return flight by a day just so the postmaster could handle all of the mail and get it properly registered and set up and so on. I don't think the pilot was terribly amused because he made a note of that in the flight record for the day. Here's some examples of covers that were carried on flights after the first day. And these are very hard to find, quite scarce. And no caches on these. But you can, and the latest example of a date stamp that I've seen from this post office is September the 8th, and that's the one on the right-hand side of this slide. That cover could be philatelic. It's signed by the pilot as well, but just some examples to show you what other kinds of covers are out there. A little bit more about this government party that went in late July to these. So the Minister of Agriculture and Mines, a mining engineer, a couple of mining engineers, a geologist, they went in to check out Wabash Kutseo, some of the mining properties in the area to find out if gold actually existed there. They took some samples, they brought it back. They were very suspicious of anything actually being, of gold actually being located there. There's a picture of them at Seven Islands on their probably their way in, and there's a cover sent by the minister to his son and this was carried out on the flight where they went back to Newfoundland. So the minister reported after they got the results back from the samples that they had gathered, and there was a public statement made on August 30th that there was no economic occurrence of gold, that the original concession was granted and financed on the basis of misinformation, and the public was advised that this was not a good thing to put money into. But privately, the minister was telling his cabinet colleagues that he thought that some fraud had been perpetuated. He wasn't sure exactly who, but he was very suspicious of the Canadian prospector Ruben Dagla, and he did not believe that Bondurant was had been duped as well in this affair. And although the Newfoundland government didn't want to initiate any legal action, they were going to contact one of the syndicates who had an American lawyer to find out whether they might be interested in pursuing legal action, which I'm not sure if that contact was ever made, but it's just interesting to see the role of the Newfoundland government in these two rushes. I think they seem to be much more interested in making money than in actually warning the public or doing very much about this. A very speculative two gold rushes. So even though there was no gold found, there was a lot of iron. Um, Here's a couple of maps showing what is now known as the one map on the left-hand side shows what's known as the Labrador iron ore trough, so to speak. And there are now a number of mines that have operated in the trough. It took until the 1950s for these to be developed. Railways have been built from the North Shore up to Shefferville and to Labrador City, Wabash. So a lot of infrastructure, a lot of mining that did actually eventually take place in this area, but gold ore no gold ever found, but iron was, but it took a while for that to actually come into production. So I just want to tie up with a few slides here and make sure there's enough time for some questions. But here I think some opportunities for some further research. I'd like to know what happened to the two individuals that seem to be the ones that may have salted samples, Bellew and Dagla. I haven't really done a lot of work to track down what happened to these two fellows after the gold rush. Um, it doesn't look like there was any buildings left at the Stag Bay Police Station site that I talked about at Big River Brook, based on a preliminary survey that was done of the area. But I'd like to know if there's any archaeological remains on the ground, tin cans, things kicking around. It's pretty close to the modern day community of Makovic. And anyways, I'd be curious to know whether there's actually anything left there on the ground. Um, and, are there any other postal history items still around related to the Stag Bay Gold Rush? And is there any items from those surveys that were conducted in 1921 or 1922? And then, was the Stag Bay post office actually located in the a building, or was it on board the ship itself? I think that would be an interesting thing to know some more about. Um, and where exactly on Dagla Bay was the Newfoundland government party camp? And are there any remains there? It's pretty close to the modern day community of Wabush. And uh, I guess someday in my dreams, I'd like to get to Wabush and have somebody take me up there by boat and check it out. And are there any more Wabush Katseo covers from the other flight dates that took place later? Um, Neither of these gold rushes have been comprehensively documented in any detail. I've got a good start on the Stag Bay Gold Rush. I've got a draft article that I've been working away at, and I got some newspaper clippings for the Wabush Katseo Gold Rush, but maybe I'll try to put that together at some point. And of course, I'd be happy to correspond with anybody on these subjects. Just a few conclusions to draw here. So there were two gold rushes 10 years apart, both fraudulent. Stag Bay was on the coast and was served by the TPO Coastal Service, but Wabash Katseo being in the interior, and it was really could only be served by air. Very few philatelic items related to the Stag Bay Gold Rush have survived. There are flight covers available for Wabash Katseo, partly because of the first flight nature and then the special airmail stamps that were issued as well. No, I haven't seen any original records from post office departments in Canada or Newfoundland. Newfoundland government records seem to be very scarce for that period. But secondary sources have proven to be really helpful, particularly newspapers of the day, doing keyword searches and things like that. There have been some accounts written by some of the prospectors and people of the day, and those appear in different journals and so on, and those can be tracked down and have proven to be really helpful in putting together these two stories. So, and that's it from me. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't rush through this too quickly for folks, but I wanted to give you a taste of these two gold rushes and the kind of work that can be done in telling these stories from the past. And thanks again to the PHSC and the Royal for putting this on.
Thank you, Kevin. Fascinating stuff. I I got into collecting Canada because I discovered a stamp from this exotic place called Newfoundland. And as a 16-year-old, I had no idea where Newfoundland was living in the US. And then I quickly discovered that there was an even more exotic place called Labrador, and started to look into that and quickly gave that up because there's just so little out there, you know. So that was a real treat to be able to see that. And is there anyone that has any questions for Kevin that you'd like to ask him? I think you covered the topic pretty thoroughly. Anyone?
Thanks, Kevin. It's new material for all of us.
Yes, it is.
And I guess it's Gordon Smith here, and I might just ask a question of Kevin. And I think you indicated you had some information from the Newfoundland archives, and I was just wondering, did you manage to access some of that online, or was that through a visit you had in St. John's, or? how have you conducted some of your research on this, say, to access some of the archival material out of Newfoundland?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Gordon. Both actually. I visited the rooms, as it's called, in St. John's. They there were a few records related to Stag Bay. There was the correspondence that I mentioned from the governor of the day to the prime minister, suggesting that there should be a public warning. That's actually in the provincial archives. Um, I'm trying to remember what else. There's the Newfoundland Geological Survey has some pretty good resources online about Newfoundland geology, and they they had a report that was done on the 1933 Wabash gold rush by uh, the geologist and I think the mining engineer to the Minister of Mines and Agriculture back in 1933. And it really kind of pointed towards Ruben Degla as the guy who probably perpetuated the fraud in the first place. And there was actually some photos in the report as well. And they had a placeholder in the report for a picture of the government tent camp. The photo wasn't there. So I'd love to find that photo to just see what the government tent camp kind of looked like. But there was quite a bit of background in that report in particular because they had visited some of the other holdings, and there was a really helpful appendix in the back of that report that listed all of the guys at the various camps. So if you get a cover and there's a return address or even the address on the cover, you can sometimes match it up with one of the mining people that were on the ground at that point and figure out, oh, that's actually a commercial cover, and they're writing to husband, wife, or whatever. So, but you can find some stuff like that. I did find the map of the Stag Bay mining claims. I found it referenced in the UK National Archives, and you can request stuff online. It takes a few weeks, sometimes months, to get something back, and you got to pay for it a little bit of money. But that was the only map I've ever seen of that before. So there's resources online if you kind of know where to look and where to go. So I encourage folks to do that.
Yeah, I might, and sorry, your response was making me think. I've often tried to access like Libraries and Archives Canada online and stuff, and that might be a great session for somebody to host is like, how do you research these things? Because I find it challenging, right? And just so to understand how you could kind of get into some of these things and find some of the material might be like just an interesting topic because I agree with you. I've found some interesting things in the archives, but it's just almost been more by luck than by and maybe that's the way it is than by good searching or whatever. So just as a thought for a future thing for RPSC or Postal History Society of Canada might be here's how you do this, right? Because I certainly know I struggle with it. So thanks, Kevin. That was a really interesting presentation and really interesting research. And it's interesting to me because it's the history part of postal history, which I think makes it really interesting as well.
I,
Great. Anybody else?
Greg, I might just respond to Gordon too, because the Royal, you actually did put on a session with an archivist from Library and Archives Canada about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I think it's
Yeah.
probably been recorded. It's posted. I was just actually at the Library and Archives Canada about 2 or 3 weeks ago in Ottawa. I squeezed one day in at the archives. Every time you go, it's a little bit different, but you really need to plan out your visits ahead of time and identify the materials you want to see and request those ahead of time. But I'd be happy to chat further about that, or maybe do work on a presentation one time about visiting the archives as well. But it's the 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 amount of records in the record group 3 for the post office department is really quite astounding, and but it's only from about 1920s to 1980. If it's stuff before, it might or might not be there, but that period is covered quite well, and lots of stuff. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it would be really helpful if you could, as someone who's done it, uh, could take us through that. I know that having had a good friend who was a librarian and archivist for many years, she used to say the worst person to tell you how to actually do research in the archive is somebody that works there. So somebody that's actually done it might serve our purposes and develop on what she or he has taught us already. So, anyone else?
Just to say thank you, Kevin. That was fascinating. That was great.
Yes, thanks, Kevin.
Good. All right. Well, Kevin, thank you so much once again for illuminating a little corner of the very obscure philatelic universe that most of us actually never get into, and we learned a great deal, and it was really very interesting. So, and just to remind everybody that I'm just pulling up my sheet here. Joel Wiener will be doing the next talk for us after a half an hour break, or we thought you might like to take a few minutes to get yourself a drink and walk around a little bit and maybe have something to eat. So Joel's presentation on the postmarks of Jerusalem during the British period will begin at 3 o'clock on this particular stream of our symposium, and the break will run till 3 o'clock, but you're welcome to stay here or go as you wish. And thank you. Thanks once again.